Hi, George. Mike here. It is January 23rd. Thank you for sending me the coach's notes on the respect for people issue. I've been wanting to get back to you ever since, and I'm finally finding a moment to squeeze in here and hit you with some of the things that it made me think about. So thank you for sending that to me. First of all, I'd like to start off with the coach's thoughts. Those were great thoughts, the 5 steps that you sent me, or the 5 points that you sent me. And I saw components of the Toyota production system, Dr. Deming and Dr. Duran in there, Shigeo Shingo, and even some TWI concepts, all kind of mixed together. They're really good points. And one of the things that really stands out with me on this issue is going to be a little different than some of the tools and Western thoughts that we have. And that is this: the fact that the lean process is respect for people. So think about that, keep that in mind as we talk today. The lean process is respect for people. So that's the point I want to make. I think oftentimes in the Western world we want to send people out to do team building missions and have parties and picnics and get-togethers and things like that to build relationships on a personal level. And the lean process really addresses this quite differently, and in my experience, significantly more effectively. So first of all, thank you for those thoughts. And second, I just wanted to hit you with, I just made some notes here to keep me on track. Back at Genie Industries, you remember my old story. Genie was failing, and we had the guy from Honda come in. And when we were failing, we were a very sick organization, of course, and we were pointing at each other, right? If we had an issue, it was because that guy wasn't smarter, that guy wasn't, didn't care, or whatever. But people really turn on each other in that kind of an environment, and I think we've all experienced that. So this guy came in, and I even did it. He took me out to the floor one time, and he had a spindle he was looking at. I specifically remember this moment. And he says, "Mike, we've got this problem with the spindle. The guys on the floor are telling me about it. And I was wondering if, how this bearing goes on." He's telling me all that. And I said, "Yeah, it's that dang head of engineering. That guy just isn't smart." And I go down that path, and he listens to me for a minute, and he goes, "Okay, yeah, I hear that." He says, "But anyway, so do you think it's the taper on the spindle, or do you think?" And he just kept focusing me back to the process. And then the other guys out in the factory did the same thing. Everybody in the office did the same thing. And each person, he would respectfully listen to them. And then he would say, "I hear what you're saying." And then he would not comment, though, ever. And he would say, "Anyway, so back to the issue, if you were an engineer, back to the issue. So this drawing, it's got some mistakes here." And so everybody started to realize pretty soon there was no reason to have those conversations. We were always going to focus back on the process. And then when we did that, of course, one of the things that happened is that we would solve problems together. So you'd end up in a little conversation with an engineer. The two of you would banter back and forth until you came up with a solution. And then suddenly you'd realize, hey, we just solved a problem together. Or if we couldn't solve it, he would always practice Genshi Genbutsu, right, in Gemba. He never said that. He'd take us out to the Gemba or out to the shop floor at the spot, and he'd say, "Okay, this is where the bearing goes on the spindle," and we'd all talk about it, and we'd be miking it, and we'd be doing all kinds of things. And then the next thing you know, we'd work together to solve problems. And pretty soon those groups started to expand. And the next thing you know, the respect inside the organization really started to change. And I'd made note later that took somewhere between 60 and 90 days for that to happen, where you saw the whole old culture start to fade and the new culture start to pick up, and people start to work together without him present now, right? Because we started building some relationships built on mutual trust. But he never talked about it. He never said, "Here's the points of trust," or "Here's the points of using a process to work together." So we focused on the process, and then the professional respect, like any organization. Oftentimes when people work in the office, or they're an engineer, right, or they're a surgeon, or they're one of the big guys in the organization, there's this sense of superiority, and it's a human thing, right? And so the way he turned that around is he just said to his engineering team, anytime you design something new, or you're going to change something, before you implement it, you bring it out to the shop floor to the people who are going to use it, you show it to them and get their input. And that took a real struggle. We lost some people doing that. There were some people whose ego couldn't take it and they had to leave. But most of the people picked it up right away and really got on top of it. It was really an interesting thing to see. One of the examples I remember was an engineer walking out, and he had a part of a steering box, and he was talking to one of my welders as I walked up, and he was saying to the welder, the welder was saying, hey, I can't get that weld in there. And the engineer was looking at it and says, you got to get that weld in there. You know, that's a critical part of putting this thing together. And the welder's like, well, no, what I'm trying to tell you is we can't do it, you know. And the engineer says to him, you know, I'm an engineer, right? And he's like, yeah. And that's, you know, when I'd walked up and I said, now hang on, John, what's going on? He says, well, you know, Mike, he says, the nozzle on the weld gun's that big around, and that hole's only that big around, so I can't get the nozzle in there to make the weld. And then the engineer went, oh, that's what you're saying. Okay, yeah, no problem. I can make that hole a little bigger. We can change the design there. That's no problem. So you can get your gun in there. And that was the end of the conversation. And I had to follow up with that engineer a couple minutes later and say, hey, look, you know, I think in most cases what we're going to find is that what the guys are bringing up is really going to be of value. And most people got that. And when that professional respect started to change, something really interesting happened, which was the professionals would come out to the floor to actually get input. They started getting better ideas on designs than they were coming up with. Or they would get information about equipment that they had no idea. You want to hold 10 thousandths here, but our equipment that you have us producing this part on only holds to 30 thousandths. Are you sure you need 10 thousandths? Or, right? Things like that, so that it was actually manufacturable. And they started to, again, work together. It was the process that made the people start working together. Then management respect. We had to start to figure out in management that it was our job to solve problems for guys, right? And do it in real time. Best example I can think of back at that time was we had a paint line, powder coat line, and they had a loop every 3 feet, and we'd hang hooks on it. And I was out there on the paint line specifically looking at it, and they had 2 little parts, one on each hook. And then, you know, the next hook down had another part, and it's going really slow, about 3 feet a minute. And so I asked the guys, you know, is there a way we can improve this process? It seems terrible. And they said, yeah, if we could have a rack with a hook 3 feet apart and lots of, you know, bars on the rack going clear down to the floor, we could put 100 parts on instead of 2. And I said, oh, how come you guys haven't done that yet? And they said, well, we go down to R&D and they don't have time. And now I'm a young VP, right? So I said, well, hang on. And I go running down there, and the main guy, Heinrich, I remember talking to him, and he says, Mike, you don't understand. We don't have time. We can't do something like that. And he's explaining it to me. And I said, Heinrich, we just wasted 3 minutes of you explaining that to me. I don't want to waste another 3 minutes. Now, it's going to be 2 pieces of bar, right? I see over here on this rack, we've got some bar that would work. And I walk over and I start grabbing it, and I said, so now we'd need it about this long, right? And he grabs a tape measure and he goes, well, actually, right, now you're going. I got the tape measure, and pretty soon we were cutting it and welding it. Of course, it only took about 45 minutes to build the thing. We go down, we hang it up, and the guys are just standing there literally with their mouths open, just going, we've wanted this for 2 years, and you just do it in 10 minutes. So at first they were sort of upset. But the second thing is I stopped and talked to them, and I said, guys, listen to me. I understand how frustrating that experience had to be, and also how rewarding. I get both. I just want you guys to know I'm here as a manager to help you solve these problems. So if you've got another one, please come to me. And I'll be honest with you, George, you know, one of the things that just makes you feel good is when you make your work better for everybody. Now with Heinrich, I had to go down and talk to him and say, look, hey, I'm sorry, I'm not going to flood you with stuff, but every once in a while I'll probably be coming down. Let's just real quick knock the stuff out on the simple stuff, and if it's more important stuff, then we'll do it after hours or Saturdays or something like that. Anyway, so management respect, again, it's a process of managers taking care of clearing boundaries, right? And oftentimes even going up and talking to the people above us to get problems solved, and having some courage, right? A little courage to go up and say, look, I need your help. This is in your court, and you need to help me solve it. So really, my experience was, this first point that I'd like to make is that we went from who to what, right? We went from who to process. And once we went from who to process, the respect that began to change was incredible. I mean, you could feel it. You could feel the stress just melt away from your body, and you could see everybody else's stress melting away. And I think all of us have had the experience that as your stress reduces and your mind isn't just constantly cluttered with how angry you are or frustrated, you begin to become much more creative and become a problem solver. You just become more effective as that stress melts away. All right, so now The next thing is, well, what is that process that I'm talking about in Lean, right? And so in manufacturing, and Lean comes from Toyota, in manufacturing, the tool that we use to really make change impactfully, like fast, to the tune of changing your organization's bottom line by millions of dollars a year immediately in the first 3-4 months, right? So quote me on that. First 3-4 months, if Lean's done correctly in any organization, you will dramatically change the bottom line. Okay, and done it hundreds of times. So here's how that process works. We have what we call rapid process improvement workshops, RPIWs, and these RPIWs collect data. So when you collect data, you do it quickly. And the first example that came to my mind was working in a building where we were watching people. The contractor himself had 30 people on site, and we were watching them, and they seemed to be doing a lot of walking. So we decided, wait a second, let's go find out why all these guys are walking around. So we collected data. We followed them for a couple of days with time sheets and spaghetti diagrams and value stream maps, right? And we just physically for 8 hours went out and walked with them and saw where they were going, wrote it down, mapped it out, just got our arms around why are people walking. And it turned out, on average, each of those 30 people were walking 1.6 hours per day. That added up to 6 people full-time the contractor was paying to just walk the job site. Think about that. I'm translating that, of course, from 1.6 per person, adding it up. It comes up to 6 people every day. It was dramatic. It was a huge cost savings, and it only took us a couple of days to do it. So then we wanted to create solutions, and we said to all those people, look, we need to solve this, but we'd like you guys to help us solve it because we want it to be your solution. So they helped us build this tool room. I remember it was long and narrow, this tool room, and you'd walk in, and here's an example. You'd be done at the end of the day, and all of the battery chargers for all the different hand tools were right here in front of you. They were all plugged in nice and neat. You'd pull the battery out of your tool, stick your tool in the slot, battery would go on the charger, right? And so people were forgetting to do that. What did they do? They created a little Poka-yoke. They didn't know they were creating Poka-yoke, but they put a block in right here so that you couldn't put the drill in the slot unless you pulled the battery out. So the process itself forced you to pull that battery out, put the drill in, and then you put the battery down in the in the charger. All right, so let people make their own solutions. Then we gave them a credit card and a couple $100, and you could make your own carts. And you got to see how these guys made their carts so that in the mornings, before they went to do their work, they could stop for a moment, think about what they're doing today, really plan it out, and then get all the tools they needed and put them on their cart, and a cart they custom built for themselves, right? Now all of a sudden they love that cart. They love the fact that they're taking a few minutes to collect all their tools. The tool rooms are organized so they're easy to get, right? So that's what the Lean process does. And then every day we go through a PDCA process, plan, do, check, act, and improve. If somebody has a new improvement on their cart and they want another $100, hell, we give it to them, right? We say, yeah, go do that improvement. Go give it a try. Tell us how you like it, and then we'll share it with everybody else if it really works good. And now you're really setting these guys up to want to follow their standard work, because in a respect for people environment, they got to collect the data. They got to come up with their own creative solutions. They got a little bit of money if they needed it, or time to create the solutions. And now when they're following their standard work, it's their standard work. They own it. I'm telling you, in days, you can watch crews who struggle, to feel good about coming to work every day. Just turn it around. It's just incredible to watch. On bigger processes like Kaikeku, so we're talking about Kaizen right now, single or incremental daily improvement, right? That continuous improvement is Kaizen, and then Kaikeku is dramatic improvement, radical improvement. Excuse me. And in the Kaikeku process, we call it 3P here in the States. That process, we'll go through a vote down. So all of the people who are involved in looking at that process are the stakeholders, the people who work in the process, plus those of us who support them, and other people who are the recipients of that process, right? So they're all together, and they work in this process of collecting data, coming up with a solid moment where everybody realizes, look, we all agree, and remember, note, I should say, If there is a person in a group who says, I don't believe that data, that's not right, then we immediately the next day assign them to go collect that same data, right? Because almost 100% of the time, it's been my experience, once they go out and collect it themselves, then they step back and go, okay, I see. Yep, you guys are right. Almost every single time. If you don't do that, and you've got two people or two different belief systems, I'll say, and you start moving into solutions, these two people will stand very rigid on what they believe is right. But if you take that extra minute and make sure that collecting data is done correctly until the whole group agrees this is the data, it's fact, it's not opinion, then that's where you'll, then starting from there, you can really go in as a group to creative problem solving, creative solutions. All right? And then you go through a vote down process. So everybody gets an equal vote. The CEO and the janitor both have one vote. And so you go through this process that's iterative. You use the data. You ensure that the data is agreed to and accurate. You move down to creative problem solving. As you do creative problem solving, everybody kind of talks and in small groups, and they understand why that's their solution. Then you sell it to the group, and then when you hear other people sell their solutions, you go, oh, that's interesting. You do a vote down. Everybody gets one vote to, let's say, 3 solutions. And everybody talks about those 3 solutions because as you heard input from the other groups, you brought that into your next iteration. Then you do another vote down, and by the time you get down to your single solution, the entire team agrees that is the solution. Now, they don't always all necessarily agree. If you talk to them afterwards, you'll say, I'm behind it. I would have done something a little different personally, but I'm behind it. That process was perfect. And I've watched people that are absolutely completely in disagreement, like 2 architects on one project. One's hired by the city, one's hired by the hospital, let's say. And just completely disagreeing. And by the time we go through that process, they go, okay, not exactly what I would have done, but that process was right. Again, the process is creating that respect for people. So now as you get down to sustain, which is always the toughest part of any lean process, the group, they'll still need help. You'll still need the science of sustainability. You'll still want to use TWI. You'll still need to do it. They'll need to do it themselves to really buy into it, and you'll have to help manage it, right? So you're going to have to do that, but look how much better that's going to be than somebody coming down from on high giving you a solution and telling you that they want you to implement it, right? Okay, so then let's take this into construction. Let's build it just a little deeper. And in construction, one of the things that we realize is that, look, if we bring the superintendent and the project manager in with the estimator, and let's say we're doing a $100 million project, in with the estimator, it'll take them one day, sometimes a day and a half, to go through every single document, every single one of the specs, and literally understand that job in detail, and the talk back and forth between the 3 of them and the things that they find that are going to get addressed here rather than out on the job site later, because the estimator just possibly couldn't have known all that. Just doesn't see things the same way a project manager sees them or a superintendent sees them. And before estimating, it's a requirement you always have to go out and walk the site. Everybody, these 3 people, go walk the site thoroughly. All right, so then you come back in after that and you'll see these drawings just full of notes and post-its and circled and right, all this stuff, and they'll find 200 things that they'll address right here. Job start process is somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks. So the job start process is from the moment the owner group says, okay, you guys won the contract, go. So you're about, let's say it's 6 weeks from now, you're going to be moving dirt. So permitting's done, fencing's done, the buildings are on site, the water's on site, all those little things that always, make the job start slowly. It doesn't actually start on day one. Every single one of them, all of our paperwork, I's dotted, T's crossed, everything right here in the job start process. And I worked with an organization and we mapped this out. So there's about 100 items that have to be taken care of by 100 different people inside your organization. But each one of them have to happen on a certain day. And of course, many of them have to happen in front of the other one, right? Because you have to have this one to do this one, right? But if you do all that right, and you've done all this right, by the time you're putting in submittals, when you write a submittal, you're literally writing the inclusions and exclusions, and you're sending that. So you don't just send them the drawings and specs. You're sending them the drawings and specs, and here's all the things that you need to have. Now, no matter how well you do that, when they come back afterwards, they're going to find things. It's just the way it's going to be. The sheetrockers are always going to find things. The roofers are always going to find things, right? And when they come back and say, look, we bid on this, but we didn't bid on that because you didn't say to do it, things like that. Or we missed this and didn't see it anywhere else. Did you guys consider this, right? Well, each one of those goes through a real fast iteration right here of going back to the other trades saying, we just had a trade, find this, this, and this. Be sure to include those in your submittal, right? So that goes through a really fast process of back and forth until you've got the submittals all correct. And then you can go to your pre-award meetings and you can, as you talk with each one of them, have them bring all their information, and you can see on their documents all the marks and post-its and notes and all the things they did. And you can really get a sense here real quick for who is actually on top of it. But you also know that everybody is apples to apples, right? All bids are apples to apples. You don't have one bid coming in low because he forgot something, and we don't know what that thing is they forgot. So then we can move into the buyout process, making sure that we're doing it for more than just price. We're doing it for reasons that we know are going to benefit the job and actually make it come in at the best value. All right, so then we cross that line into we're finally out on the job site, which is where we normally implement lean. Now you can imagine the sense of respect that this team is going to have for this group who did all this. And all those sub-trades, the respect they're going to have for the management team on site if they got to be part of that process, but also they get to be part of a new process, which is the last planner scheduling, phase planning. You got task list or tick list, whatever you guys are calling it. And then you actually have the OAEC process working, right? So every issue that comes up is solved in minutes or hours. No more 2 weeks, 2 months. You know what reality is. It just drags out until you got 40 or 50 RFIs, and you got all these issues and arguments and change orders, and it's just a mess. And these guys are out there all trying to operate it, and management's kind of sitting back, up in the office kind of going, geez, oof, God, that's got to sting, right? And so they go through their pre-install and their quality issues. In other words, they just take a few minutes to sit down with each trade. I think you already know all this, but I mean, just a few minutes to sit down with each trade and say, look, walk us through your install process, walk us through the quality issues that are key. And there's a whole quality process written, simple one, very easy, simple to follow, but self-managed by the trades, right? And then you go through that stuff before they start building, and then after they build, maybe the first 4 hours of the first day, you go out and you inspect. You make sure that the installation's going correctly. All the the grout is a 1/4 inch thick and the right color, and the tiles go in the right direction, and I don't know, whatever it is. And now you get down to the collaboration of LPS and OAEC, and as issues come up, we go back out to this process that we were talking about, gather all the people together, go immediately after that issue and solve it. No issues get to stand, right? And you have a nice escalation process. So we've talked in the past that lean lives in that tension between just-in-time and Jidoka, right? It's that tension between the two. So as just-in-time, the LPS, phase planning, tick list, all those things, as they happen, that's your just-in-time, they bring to the surface immediately when something's gone wrong, right? And that's done through our site walks. We've talked about that one in the past. So Jidoka, stop the line. You immediately know when something's off plan. Well, if you have a team that really has a good process of working together to go solve things, then they're going to do that because they build that muscle. How do we solve things together? We don't all just stand and yell at each other anymore. We start to solve problems based on moral correctness rather than, that contract says this in this little corner on this back page and this fine print down at the bottom, right? I got you. Any lawyer will back me. I'm like, oh, okay, but you know what? That's not really the issue here. Let's solve it in a manner that builds that respect. And then the next thing is, this is just last week on a job, we had a guy who was going to put in a sink, freestanding sink, and there was 10 feet of pipe that had to be added. And he wouldn't do it for under $10,000. And we said, but wait, the sink's $2,500 and you got about 6 hours of labor and a $200 pipe. Why 10,000? And he just got mad and started yelling and ran off. We're like, well, that's not how you do an argument. You can't just, we had to go get him and bring him back. You know, I get that in the past somehow this has worked, jumping up and down and screaming and yelling and, I don't know, pitching a fit and whatever you're trying to do. And then, of course, the contract administrator, he's on the other side saying, make them do it and we'll argue it out in court later. And I'm like, well, time out, guys. Stop for a second. Somewhere along the way here, we've really come at odds with each other. Let's see if we can heal this and get it back together. But we want you to make a good profit, definitely. But we don't want you to double the work. We're just screwing the client and screwing our reputation, right? And so as that team gets better at that, then the subs start working with it. And you see it, I know you guys have seen this. You've seen that team that just starts working together. They start solving problems together. They quit that type of behavior, and it all starts to change. And that respect for people changed right from the top by changing the process, the way that we build. And we always focus our time in lean right here, and none of the rest of it. I always get to a job site and everybody goes, I want to put Post-its on the wall. That's lean, isn't it? Post-its on the wall. And wheels on some stuff out on the out on the job site. I'm like, well, yeah, that's part of it. So I just wanted to make the point again. Again, what we learned here was to change our focus from who to the process, right? Then we learned what the process is that supports that brings the people in. There's no of this talking about, don't forget to include so-and-so, and remember he's quiet, he's a B-type personality and all that. Be sure you pull him in and get his input and challenge him and all that. And it's like, that's the Western process for respect for people. In the lean process, he's part of the group. The whole group gets up and makes their presentation to sell, and he's got part of that presentation. Everybody does, right? That's just part of the process. So we're not going in and managing those pieces and components. The process itself includes everybody. There is no other process when followed correctly, right? Like Shingai Jitsu teaches it, or like the Toyota Production System teaches it. Okay, and so you understand that process comes together, but then you have to bring it over to construction, because believe me, healthcare is much more similar to manufacturing than it is to construction. So bringing the management philosophies and methodologies from lean to construction is a little different than bringing it to healthcare. Healthcare was actually easier. It has a flow of events that are different than construction. But as you start to bring it to construction and you start to realize where everything fits, it's all the same philosophies, same methodologies. It just needs to be applied in a way, you think about it, that supports the just-in-time and the Jidoka and the components of all those. Okay? So anyway, I just wanted to take a moment, and I know you're going to be happy that I kept this video under 5 minutes, so that was my goal. And anyway, George, I just wanted to hit you with that end of it, thinking about lean, thinking about respect for people in lean from a little different perspective. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to kind of rethink that through and put it on film.